Today, we're going to look at how to do authentication with SvelteKit. Hello YouTube. My name is Braden Gerard, and today we're going to look at how we can do session-based authentication using cookies in SvelteKit. So we're going to go and take a look at how we can implement that both on the client side as well as the server side of SvelteKit using pages and endpoints so that we can look at how we could set up pages in our application to only be accessible to users who are authenticated. So we'll build a very simple login and register form, and then we'll show how you can either access a page once logged in or have an access denied error if you're not logged in. So let's jump into the code and take a look. Okay, so we're just going to start a new SvelteKit project. So we'll make a directory for it. We'll just call it SvelteKit-auth. And we'll go into that directory and we'll do an npm init svelte at next. And it's going to ask, do I want to install the package? Yes. Do I want to use TypeScript? No. CSS? Yes. Lint? No. We'll pass. Prettier. No, we don't need that. No. Okay, so now we're going to do an npm install just to install all of the default SvelteKit components that we need. And we'll just open up our project over here. So we will go to our SvelteKit auth project, open it up. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go here and we're going to set our server-side rendering to allow external dependencies. We'll save that in our svelte.config file. And then we'll go to our package.json, and there's a couple different modules that we need to add to this project. We're going to be using Redis as a database just because it's very straightforward and simple to use, just a key value store. So I don't want to focus too much on the database here. So let's just install the npm module for that. So we're going to use an npm module called Tedis, T-E-D-I-S. So npm install Tedis, just a very simple Redis client or module for Node. And then we will also install the cookie module so that we can deal with our cookies. So npm install cookie. And then we will also install a string hash module because we're going to be doing some hashing of our passwords because we don't want to save our passwords in plain text in the database. We're going to install string hash, and we'll also install one last module called UUID, which will allow us to generate some unique IDs for our users. So with all of those modules installed, we should have everything that we need to set up our authentication here. So let's just close this. Now we're going to start up a Redis database here on our local host. So I've already installed Redis. That's not going to be part of this tutorial, but I'll just start up the database here so that we can access that Redis database. Okay, so let's go over to our project and start sort of setting things up here. So in our routes folder, we will not be using a layout. So let's just get rid of the layout for now. We don't need a layout for this project. We will go into our index and we can pretty much clear everything out of here. We don't need to really use any of this. We could keep some of the CSS, I guess. We'll keep the text align center, sure. The H1, sure. We can keep the CSS, that's fine. But we'll clear out all of the HTML. This out. We'll also clear out the component that we're importing, and we'll just call this, I don't know, authentication with cookies in SvelteKit. Okay, and then we will scaffold out our components here that we're going to be using. So in our lib folder, we'll make a new component, and we're going to call this component login.svelte. Okay, that'll handle our login. And then we're going to make another component called register.svelte, which will handle our registration to create an account. We'll get rid of the default counter component here. And we'll go back and we'll just import those two components into our main app here. So import login from $lib/login. And then we'll also import register from $lib/register .svelte. And that should be it for now. Okay. Now we will go down here and we'll just put these two components in the page. So we're just going to have them both showing at the same time on our homepage, just a login box or a register box, just for the purposes of this tutorial. We're going to make an event listener on them. So whenever we successfully log in or whenever we successfully register, something happens. So let's say that when we successfully log in, we're going to redirect them to the profile so they can see their profile information. We'll have a very basic profile. So let's just do an on success event listener, and we'll create that in a minute on the login component that will redirect to profile. And for registration, we'll do the same thing. So for register, we'll say on success, we're going to just redirect to profile, because we're not going to be verifying emails or anything like that. So once they've registered, we'll just say that they're also authenticated, so that they can go straight to the profile after they register. Okay, so both will redirect to profile. So let's create that function right now. Redirect to profile. And inside of there, we just want to send them a redirect to the profile route. Okay, so let's first create the profile route. So we'll make a new folder here called profile. And inside of that folder, we'll just create an index.svelte. And we'll just put an H1 in there for now that says profile, just so we know that that's the profile page. Okay, and if we go back to our index here, now this is how you redirect on the client side. You can import this goto method from the special app/navigation file that comes with SvelteKit. And from there, we will import goto, and we can use goto like this. We say goto, and then the path that we want to go to. So we're going to say /profile. Okay, so then whenever we call our redirect to profile method, it will go to the profile on both of these when the on success event gets fired. So let's go into our components now, and we'll create them quickly. So for the login component, we want to, first we need to have an event so that when the login succeeds, it actually calls that on success. So let's import create event dispatcher from Svelte, and we will create a dispatch which is equal to the create event dispatcher method, and then we're gonna dispatch once they log in. So we'll do an async function login, and somewhere in here we're going to call dispatch. So let's just keep that on the back burner for a minute, and we'll initialize our email and password variables here, okay, so that we can use them in our template and get those, and then inside of login we'll use the email and password to register or to log in our user. So inside of our actual HTML, we need what? We need a title, so let's just call this login, h1 login. We need two inputs, right? So we need an input with the type equal to email, and we need to bind the value of that to our email. And we'll just give it a placeholder so that we know what we're going to put in this input field. A placeholder of enter your email. And then we'll close that input. And then we'll do one more input with the type equal to password. And we'll bind that value to our password variable. Placeholder equals enter your password. And we'll close that input. And then we just need the button to log in. So we'll say button and on click. So we're going to bind the on click listener of that button to the method login. And we'll put login as the text for that button. Okay, so now we've got our login component here. We'll write this login logic in a second here. So let's just save this, and let's just copy most of this over because we're going to do very similar stuff on the register component. So we'll paste this into the register component for now. And the only thing we're going to add to the register component is we'll add a name so that they can, when they register, they also input their name. We will change this to be register because we want to call register when they click the register button. So we'll change this to say register. This is going to call the register method. And then we need a third input here. That is the name input. So enter your email. We'll put that in the middle. We'll say name here, bind it to name, enter your name. And this is going to be a text input. Okay, so we have the 3 inputs on our register, and we bound it to the register button. So far, that's pretty much the same as our login, just with that extra field. Now, where it's going to differ is in our methods here, register and login, what we're going to do. So let's just save this, and let's go check out our project really quick, make sure it's looking how we want it to look. So we have our index.svelte here, our main page, with a login and a register component that both call this onSuccess event listener, which we haven't implemented yet, but we will inside of these methods. And they should have, the login should have 2 fields, and the register should have 3 fields down below. So let's just run our project. So npm run dev. And let's go to localhost 3000 in our browser. There we go, localhost 3000. And what are we getting here? Failed to load source lib register.register.svelte. Did I type something wrong there? Yep, double register here. So let's save that. And let's go back, and there's our page. Very small. Let me zoom in a bit for you guys. Holy, that title. Okay, so let's just make that title a little smaller. Let's make our H1, let's go 2 rem, and we'll save that. And we don't need a 4 rem margin here. Let's do a 1 rem margin. Save that. Go look at that now. There we go. It's a little better. Okay, so we have a login. Oh, and I forgot to change the title for a register, so it should be login and register. Perfect. Okay, so we have these 2 forms, one to log in, one to register. Now we need to actually implement what they do when we click the login or click the register button. So if we go first, let's do the registration first. So if we go to the register method here, what we want to do is we want to send a request to our server endpoint, which we're going to implement in a minute. And we'll call that server endpoint register. Maybe we'll put it under a directory called auth. Okay, so in our routes folder, we make a new folder called auth. And in that folder, we make a new file called register.js. Now, this is how you make endpoints or server-side routes for SvelteKit. You make a .js or TS if you're doing TypeScript file, and you implement some special functions in there, which we'll do in a minute, that will receive the requests. Okay, so that's going to be our path to our server route, or our endpoint or API endpoint, whatever you want to call it. So in our register here, we'll say async function register, we're going to do a const result is equal to await and fetch, and then we want to fetch that route. So auth/register. Okay, and then we will send it the method of post because we want to do a post request. We will give it a body, which is going to be the information that we're sending from the register page. Now we want to stringify that because we want to make sure that it's properly encoded to go over the wire to the server. So we'll stringify that, and we'll pass in the email, the password, and the name. Those are going to be the items we pass in the body of the request. And then we also need to set the headers on the request to be of content type application JSON, because we're sending this as a body as JSON data. We're not sending it as a form request. So we'll say application/JSON. And that should do it for our auth/register post request. Now, when we get the result back from that, we're going to say if the result is okay. Okay, so if we get a 200 response back from our server, then we want to dispatch a success message, which will call our success event listener here and redirect them to the profile. Okay, so we dispatch success. Otherwise, if it's not okay, then we would want to give an error, right? So we'd say else, and then we're gonna actually, let's set an error variable here. So let error, and then we will say error equals an error occurred. We'll just have a generic error for now. Now we also want to surround this with a try catch to make sure that everything succeeds here on this await. So we'll do a try, and we'll tab all this in, and then we'll have a catch, and we'll catch an error here. We'll just console.log if we get an error, and we will set our error message equal to just an error occurred again. Okay. And then at the top here, we also want to set our error equal to undefined, just so that if we have an error, but then the next request succeeds, the error doesn't stay there, or it can reset it for whatever the next error is. And then we're going to go down here, and under, I guess above the registration button, we'll put our error in. So we'll say if there's an error, so if it's not undefined, then we'll just say print out the error here, and close that if. Now we want to do the same thing for our login component. So I'm just going to copy this over really quick to save time. And we also want to have an error variable here. And then we'll set it to undefined right away when we call login. Again, we're going to have a try catch. And we'll console.log if we get an error in the try catch, and we'll set error equal to error. No, so error equal to an error occurred. Now, normally you'd put better error messages, but just for the purposes of this, I'm just going to have a generic error message. Okay, so login is, or sorry, register is done, I believe, for now until we implement the server-side routes for it. So let's save that and go back over to register, or sorry, login, I'm mixing them up. We just finished register. Go back over to login, and let's implement our fetch here. So in our login, we're going to implement a fetch method as well, but this fetch will just have to send the email and password. So we're going to say const result equals await fetch. We're going to fetch /auth/login. And we need to make that login route. So over here under auth, we'll make a new file, login.js. Okay. And in that fetch to login, we want to send the method type of post because it's going to be a post request. We want to send the body of a JSON.stringify, the object with email and password. And then we want to also send headers with our content type set to application JSON so that it knows that we are sending a JSON body and not a form. That should be it for the login. Let's just close that. And then let's, again, check if our result comes back as a 200, so res.ok. Then we are going to dispatch success. And otherwise, we are going to do a error equals an error occurred. And that should do it for the login. Okay, so we've implemented our login and register components that send our email and password for login, and for register sends our email, password, and name to the server. And now we need to implement our server-side routes. So let's implement our login route as well as our register route. So our login route will be, have to import a couple different modules here. So we're going to import string hash, okay, because we need to hash their password when we compare it with the password in the database, because we're going to be hashing it when we actually register the user. We need to import, import our cookie module. because we're going to be creating a cookie for the user when they log in and sending that cookie back to the browser. We need to import the UUID module so that we can generate the ID for the user, or generate a unique ID for the cookie that we're going to send to the user. So that's the UUID. And then we're going to also import our TEDIS so that we can set up our database client. Whoops, hold on. Still learning this new keyboard. It should be a little quieter for the recordings for you guys, but gotta remember where all the keys are. Import TEDIS. Okay, so let's initialize our database right away. And then with the host of localhost and the port of 6379, which is the default port. Now, I didn't set a password on my database, so we don't have to have a password here, but you could add the password property here as well if your database did have a password. Now we're going to do an export. So this is this special function I was talking about that your server-side route needs to implement. Export async function, and if it's a post, it'll accept post requests. You can do a get function here to accept get requests. You can also do a update, and you can also do a delete. So it's DEL for delete because the delete keyword is reserved in JavaScript, so DEL. So we're going to do a post, and inside of the post request, we're going to put the body, or we're going to deconstruct the body that comes from the request object in the post. And we want to use that body to get out our email and password. Okay. Now I'm going to stop here for login, and we're going to do register first just so that we can register a user obviously before we log them in. It just makes more sense conceptually to me. So we're going to copy all this over though, because this is all going to be sort of identical code between login and register. We're going to need to do all this in register as well. So let's go back over to register, paste that in there. And then we're going to, inside of register, we're going to go const user is equal to json.parse. Okay, so we're going to get that user from our Redis database. So db.get, and we're going to look for the user by body.email. Okay. Now I'm doing json.parse on the response from the database because when we save out to Redis, we're going to be saving everything as a string. Okay, so we save our objects out as a string to Redis because Redis expects string as the value for a key value pair. So we're going to do a json.stringify when we save to Redis, and we're going to do a json.parse when we get our result from Redis. So await db.get, and the key is going to be the user's email for our users. So we're going to check to see if there's a key that exists with the email that's being sent for the login. Okay, so that we can actually see if the user exists, or not for the, sorry, for the login, for the register. So this is register, remember. We're going to check to see if a user exists with that email for the register, because if a user does exist, we're not allowing them to create a duplicate user, right? So if the user exists with that email in our Redis database, then we're going to return a response. So when you're doing an endpoint in SvelteKit, you need to return, well, you don't need to, but there's optional things you can return, and one of them being the status. So we're going to return a 409 because that's a conflict. The user already exists, and we're going to send in the body of the response. We're going to send a message, we'll just say, and we'll say user with that email already exists. Okay. Now, if we don't get a user back, that's good. That means we can register with that email. So we'll do an await db.set, okay? And we'll set a key of body.email with the value of json.stringify. And inside of that object, we're going to pass the email, so body.email. We're going to pass the password. Now, we don't want to pass the password in plain text, so that's where our string hash module gets used. We're going to save it as a hashed version of the password, just in case anybody ever got into our database. And we're going to save out the body.name. Okay, so the user's name. And that's the object that we're going to save out as a string to as the value in our Redis database for the key of body.email. Okay, now we're going to generate a cookie for them because the user just registered successfully. So let's generate a cookie and send it back so they can be authenticated. So we'll create a cookie here, const cookie ID, or we'll make an ID for our cookie, sorry, first. And we'll make that equal to the UUID version 4. So that'll generate a unique ID for us using that UUID plugin, which is a long string of characters. And then we're going to say await db.set. So now we're going to save out again to our database. We're going to save out the cookie ID as the key. Okay. And then the value that we're going to save out is going to be just something that we can identify that user with. So we're going to save out their email. So email body.email. Okay, so this is how we know if the user's cookie is valid, because if they have a cookie with the same ID that exists in our Redis database, then we can grab their email and pull the user's information from the email key. So we have that set. Now we can actually send that cookie back in our response. So let's just create a header for our response here first. I'm just going to separate that out since it's going to be a little longer. And we're going to set the cookie in the header. And we're going to use that cookie module now. So cookie.serialize. Okay. And then we give the name of the cookie. So we're going to we'll just call it the session ID. And then we're going to set the what is the actual ID of the cookie. So we're going to say cookie ID. Okay, and then what are the options on our cookie? So we're going to put some options in here for our cookie. Roll down here, sorry. Okay, so the options for our cookie are going to be that is HTTP only. So we're going to set that to true. It also should have a max age. So how long do we want our cookie to be valid for? We're going to say 1 week. So that would be 60 times 60 times 24 times 7. So that's 1 week of time. Same site. We'll just set that to lax. I don't need this to be super secure for this demo purposes. And then the path that we want our cookie to be valid for is going to be root, anything after root. So that's how we set our cookie in our header that we're going to send back in our response. So now we can send back our response. So we're going to send back a response with a status of 200 because they successfully registered. We're going to send back headers, which is this object for our headers. And then we're going to send back a body of message, and that message will just be success. Okay, oops. Save that. So our register route should be implemented now. So let's just go and test that out really quick. So if we go back to our browser and we, let's inspect here for a minute. I don't even have my developer tools on. I just got a new Mac. And as you can see, not much is set up yet. So let's just turn on my developer tools. Turn on developer tools. There we go. Okay, now I can pull up our developer tools here. So if we look in our browser, if we go to the storage tab, sorry, this might be a little small for you guys. If we look under cookies, there's nothing here. Okay, so let's do a login. So we'll do give an email. So let's just give my email, and then we will do a name, and then we will do a password. So I'm just going to do PASSWRD, password, register. Okay, and look at that, we get redirected to the profile. So it looks like everything worked. If we look back in our cookies here, we can see that we have should have a cookie. Oh yeah, here it is, the cookie with the ID. Okay, so there's our cookie with that UUID that I generated. Okay, in our storage now. So the cookie's there, the cookie got saved in the browser, and the profile came up. Now, we haven't checked yet, we just redirected to profile. So really profile is not actually blocking me from anything right now. And we'll look at how we can send them to an unauthorized page if they're not authorized, because technically right now, even if I didn't have my cookie, so let's just delete the cookie out of the browser here. There's my cookie session ID, delete. Okay, even if I had that gone, I could just refresh and hit profile, right? It's not a protected route right now at all. And I'll show you how we can protect that in a minute. So we have register working, good. Let's go back and quickly implement our login server-side logic, okay? So on login, we want to, sorry, this is the component. We can close that. We're done with that. We're done with register. Profile. We're also done with our index, I believe. We're done with our config. Let me just clean up a little here. Okay, so our profile, our login route, and our register we just finished implementing. Okay, so let's go to login. So for a post request to our login route, we are going to do similar stuff. We're just not going to actually create the user. So let's actually copy over some of this code. So we'll copy over the cookie stuff and the response from our register route just to save some time, because we're going to be doing this once we successfully log in as well. So let's copy that. That'll be what we do after we successfully log in. And then we will also do a get to get the user, because we want to check if the user exists when they log in. And if they don't, then the email that they provided wasn't even valid. But then we also want to check if the password matches, and we'll do that in a second. So let me just see here. We do want to get the user by their email when we log in. So perfect. So we'll take this over to the login. Okay, so we try and get the user by the email they provide for the login. If the user doesn't exist in this case, then we're going to want to return a 401 because we couldn't find the user. So user with that email does not exist. Now that's not really secure to tell the user that, because if they're trying to brute force, they know that it's the email that's wrong and not the password. So we would be better to say a user with that email or password, or sorry, we would just say incorrect email or password. Just so they don't know which one they actually got right or wrong. Just a little more secure for login. Now, if the user does exist, that means that, okay, they exist, but we don't want to authenticate them yet because we don't know if they actually got the password right. Obviously, that would be very insecure. So we're going to say if the user.password is equal to, if the user.password hashed, right? So if the user, the user.password that we're getting, so this user's password is going to already be hashed, right? Because it's in the database, so we hash it before we put it in. So if the user password that we have in the database is not equal to, then we're going to string hash the password that they sent us from the client, because that one's not hashed yet. So if we hash that password, then we're going to check if the hashed matches the stored hashed password or doesn't match in this case. And if it doesn't match, then we're going to return right away, and we'll return a status of 401 and a body with a message of unauthorized. Okay, so that handles if they're not logged in, and then that handles if the password is not correct. Now, if it is correct, it will get passed here and it will generate the cookie for them. It will again save that cookie to the database, and it will send the cookie back. So this is all the same pretty well. And yeah, so that should be it for login. So let's save that. Let's just go and test out our login really quick. So if we go back here, and let's just open up. So since we aren't actually checking if this is successful yet. Well, yeah, if it's successful, it should hit the 200. So actually, we can test this. It should redirect to profile. So we've already registered bradengerard@icloud.com. So let's just put in the password of PASSWRD. I'll save that in my password manager and log in. And we got an error. Password is not defined on routes auth login line 20. Okay, so it looks like I made a typo somewhere. Let's go back over and look at that. Auth login line 20. Line 20 user.password. PASSW. Okay, so we're looking for the user by the body.email. Maybe we're not getting the user. Let's console.log out here what we're getting for user. Actually, hold on. Did I delete? No, that should be fine. Okay, let's do this one more time. Okay, the user is there. The password, that's the hash password. So password is not defined. Oh, it looks like we're getting, so we have the hashed password, PASSWRD, getting the user, auth login line 20. Okay, let's see. Did I miss something there? Oh, it's probably this password, and that's because it's not defined. I need to say body.password. So body.password, there we go. So we get the password from the request. That should fix it up for me. And then we're gonna say, and PASSWRD, log in. And it looks like it succeeded because it redirected us to the profile. Okay, so now let's actually check. So right now we're just showing the profile irregardless of whether they're logged in or not, right? So let's log the user out now. So we're not going to build a logout for this. We'll do it the developer way, and we'll delete the cookie out of our storage here. Okay, so if I refresh now, nothing's going to change because currently we weren't even really checking the cookie. We were just setting a cookie after we logged in, right? So if I go to /profile right now, it's still going to show me my profile. So let's fix that first. Let's redirect to unauthorized if you shouldn't be allowed to access the profile. Okay, so we'll go back over to our code, and we're going to create this special file. So this is the magic of session authentication in SvelteKit. There's this file called hooks.js, okay? And you just create that inside of your source folder. So inside of the source folder, we're going to make a new file called hooks.js. Okay, and inside of that hooks.js file, there is a couple different methods you can implement, and we're going to look at the get context method and the get session method. Okay, so in here we're also going to need our cookie module, our this cookie from cookie, and we're going to need our database so that we can check the cookies in the database. So we're going to import Tedis from Tedis from Tedis. Okay, and then we're going to initialize a DB. And inside or initialize a DB connection, I should say. And we're going to connect using the host of the local host and the port of 6379, that default port. Again, I have no password on my database. And then we're going to export async function, okay, and get context. So that's the first special function we're going to use. Now this function gets called every time a request gets sent to SvelteKit, and inside the parameters that get passed to this function in get context, we have a headers that we can destruct from the request that comes in here. So we get the headers from the request, okay, and then we are going to get the cookie out of that header. Because I've set cookie in my browser, when I make a request from the browser, it sends the cookie along with it. So inside of here, we're going to say const cookies equals, and we'll say cookie.parse. So we're going to look for a cookie in the header. So headers.cookie. And if we find it, great. And if we don't find it, we'll just set this to the empty string. Okay. So we've tried to pull our cookie out of the header now. So using that cookie module. So we should have something inside of cookies with the name of session ID if it actually got our cookie back. So we'll say if cookies. So cookies will exist because I'm setting it to an empty string if it doesn't exist. So we'll have a value here. We'll say if cookies does not contain session underscore ID. Okay, then we're going to just return right away, and we're going to return authenticated, an object with authenticated in it, set to false. So this object that we're returning is the context that gets passed to our server endpoints. It's also the context that gets passed to our get session method, which we'll implement in a minute. And this context is sort of like server side only, so nothing can see this, so you can put stuff in here that's okay to be server side only. And then when we implement the get session method in here, that is what's going to be sent back to the client. So that's what we have to be careful of what we put in there. So for now, we're just going to say authenticated is false if they don't have the cookie. If they do have the cookie, then what we'll do is we'll get the user session from our Redis database. Okay, so we'll do json.parse the await db.get, and then we're going to get from the DB, so cookies.session ID. Okay, so that's that UUID that we generated, remember, and we stored that as the key for our cookie that we stored in the database with the user's email inside of it. So we'll get from our database that key, and if the session ID from the cookie exists in our Redis database, which it should if the cookie is set in the browser, then we will say, so we'll just double check that it does exist. And if we do get it back, then we will return, again, a new context, this time with authenticated set to true, and an email, which is the user session.email. So we'll store the user's email in this context as well, because we have that from that session that we stored. If the user session doesn't exist for some reason in the database and the cookie is set, then for some reason their cookie is no longer valid. So in that case, we'll just return authenticated set to false. Okay, so we either get an authenticated true here or authenticated false. And if we get an authenticated true in the context, then we know we'll have an email available. So this gets passed along to our endpoints as well as the get session. Now the get session is what we set up to be sent back to our client inside of the session object on the client. So we'll export the function get session, okay? And inside of there, then we can basically return what we want back to the client. So get session takes parameter, takes the request parameter, and we're going to pull out of that the context. Okay, and from that context, we can pull out any of this info that we just put into the context. So we're going to say if context.authenticated. So this is where we only want to send back what we want to be seen on the client. So if the context is not context.authenticated is not. So if it's not authenticated, basically, then we'll just send back an object to the client. So the session object that we are going to send back to the client will just be a return object of authenticated set to false, or not false. I guess we could put false there, or we could just say context.authenticated, send back the same value. But if it does exist, so if we get past this, then we'll return a session object with authenticated, set to context.authenticated again, and a email of context.email. So we'll just send the email back to the client. So we have the email, and we have that the session is authenticated to true. So this is what comes back in the session object. We'll save that. Okay, so we're sending back the authenticated is true, and we're sending back the email. So now that we're sending back authenticated true and email, we can actually decide what we want to do based on that session object, okay? So this should come back to the client now, and we can make decisions based on that. So if we go to our profile, Okay, and in our profile, we open up a script that runs before the page is loaded. So that'll be context equals module. And inside of there, we're going to do the export, the async function. Sorry, so export async function, and that's the load function. Okay, and inside that load function, we can get the session as that gets passed to it. And that's that session that we just set, returning from the get session method on the server. So we can get this session now, and we're going to say if the session dot authenticated. Okay, so if the session is not authenticated, then we want to return a status, return an object with the status set to 302, which is a redirect. And we're going to say we want the redirect to go to /auth/ let's say unauthorized. Okay, so we'll make that route on the client side. And basically in this load function, if you return a status of 300 status code with a redirect, it will automatically redirect the client when the page loads to wherever you send the redirect. So let's go into our routes here, or in our auth file in our routes, and make a new folder, and we'll just call that unauthorized. And inside of there, we'll make a new file called index.svelte. And we'll just make an H1 in here saying unauthorized. We'll save that. And if we go back over here and save this, now if we're not logged in, we should be redirected to an unauthorized page when we try and visit profile. If we are logged in, so I guess we don't need an else, we can just go after the if here. And if we are logged in, we're going to return a props object, okay, which will get exposed to our page. And in that props object, we're going to return the email that we are authenticated with, just so that we have the email on the client, so that we can do some requests for the profile info based on that email. Okay, so we get the email here, and then that means that we can set up a script that runs on the page, and we can say export let email so that we get that as a props, and we can use that email to make a request. Now, currently, when you're making requests, there's a bit of a bug when you're making requests and your cookie doesn't get passed in the request. But if we do it in the on mount on the client side, it will work for now. So we're going to make an on mount call here. So when our page first mounts to the DOM, then we will make an async request here. We're going to say const result is equal to. So when our profile page loads, we're going to fetch the user profile. Okay, so we'll fetch /user. And that'll just be a GET request, so we don't need to send any data there. And we will then store the user inside of, we'll get the JSON body from the user and we'll store that inside of a user object. And then we'll just set a name equal to user.name. Okay, so let's make a variable in here called name. And I'm just showing you how you can get some data back once you're actually authenticated from routes that would normally you need to be authenticated for, okay? So we're gonna get the name from the user profile on the server. And then over here, we'll just say, in the page, we'll say hello, and then the person's name. You are logged in with the email, and then we'll just give their email there that we got from the session. So you can get data in the session, okay, so you can store info in the session, there's one way, or you can make a request to the server, and because you have your cookie and the server will authenticate you, you can send back that user data. So let's create that user route. Okay, this is the last route we have to make, so let's go inside of our routes, make a new folder called user, and inside of user, we will make an index.js, so that we can just request /user. And in here, we will just import our Tedis from Tedis so we can access our database. and we'll do a const db equals new Titus, and inside of there, we will set the host. I've done this 3 times now, you think I'd remember what I'm doing, to localhost, and we set the port to the default port of 6379. Okay, that opens up our database connection, and then we'll export async function, and this time we're going to do a get function because it's just a get request. We pass in that context that we're setting up in our get context method inside of hooks.js, and we're going to use that context to make sure they're authenticated, right? So we're going to say if context.authenticated. Now remember, this is server side only, this context here. So this can't be tampered with from the client. So we know that if context.authenticated is set to false in this case, then they're not authenticated. So then we're going to return a object with the status of 401 unauthorized, and we're going to send in the body a message of unauthorized, and we're going to set the that should be all we need to do for this. Yeah. As we return a 401, if they are authorized, then sure, we'll go to the database. We'll do use json.parse, and we will await db.get, and we'll use the context.email. So again, that email was set on the context object in get context. That was server side only based on the cookie. So we know that's the proper email that we should be accessing. And then we will check if there's something there, and we'll parse it to a user object. If it's there, which it should be, we could handle if it's not there. So we'd say if the user doesn't exist. So if there's not a user, or there is not a if there's not a user, that's fine. Then we will return a status of 404 not found, and we'll just return a body of, or sorry, not, yeah, body with a message inside of it saying user not found. This should never happen, but we'll put it there just in case. And then otherwise we found the user, so let's delete the user.password. Okay, we're gonna take the password out. Even though it's hash, we don't wanna send that back to the client. So we're gonna delete the user.password. I mean, even if it is hash, you don't wanna send that back to the client, right? Because then they could use that to check with the database. I mean, it wouldn't work, but it's sort of insecure to send back the hash password, so we don't really wanna do that. So we'll delete the user.password, and then we'll return a status of 200, and we'll send back the body, which is the user object. Okay, and that should be it for our /user call to our server endpoint. So when we get the user back, we parse the user from the JSON, and we get that user object. We get the name out of that user, so user.name, and we show the name on the profile. So if I go back now and test this out, so we'll just clear out our cookies just so that we can start fresh, and we'll delete out that session ID, and then we will log in, and we'll log in. And as you can see, once we log in with our cookie, we now have hello Braden, you are logged in with the email bradengerard@icloud.com. So now I'm getting my profile information. Now, if I were to go back to that page, and if I were to clear out my cookie again, and let's just try and navigate to the profile page, I'm going to be redirected to this unauthorized page. Now, even if I was, since it's client-side, even if I wasn't able to intercept the data on the profile page before it redirected me here, it's not an issue because my request that I'm making to that profile page, so if we go and look at our profile page here in the on mount, when I'm requesting the user data here, on our server-side route for that, we're checking if the context is authenticated using that cookie, right? So if they're not authenticated, it's not going to send them back any data, so they're just going to see an empty page. So the only way that you actually get that data on that page is by logging in with your credentials. Okay, so that's how you can do cookie-based authentication or session authentication in SvelteKit. Now, there does seem to be a little bug the odd time here where my authenticated comes back false the first time I hit the profile when I log in. And then if I go to /profile, it's authenticated. Okay, so I'm not sure if this is something specifically with SvelteKit at the moment, because you can see here I get an authenticated false right away, but then when I refresh profile, I get authenticated true. So there's a bit of a race condition here going on where sometimes my session is not set before the redirect happens or before the page loads. So I'm going to look into that, and I'll drop it in the comments on if there's a solution to that, or maybe I just did something wrong. But this is how you would implement cookie-based session authentication in SvelteKit. Thanks for sticking with me for another one of my YouTube tutorial videos. Today, we looked at authentication with SvelteKit, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up so that YouTube knows that others should be watching this video as well. And if you really liked my content, make sure to subscribe to my channel because I'll be releasing all kinds of tutorial videos in the future and more content on SvelteKit for sure. Thanks, have a great day.